have to pray against our own comfort. Isn't that a weird thing to say? We need to fight against our own comfort. I have a towel warmer. Yeah. No, if you don't have a towel warmer, I don't think you understand what's happening. We went and visited my dad in Alabama, and he had a towel warmer. And I got out of the shower, and there's a towel warmer right there. And my dad went in before I showered, and he had put my towel in there, and I got out, and I wrapped myself around it, and I just thought, I need a towel warmer. So for Christmas, Michelle got in my bath, I have a towel warmer. If you don't have a towel warmer, I don't know what third world country you're living in, right? But let's just be very, very honest that it's very difficult for us as Americans in the 21st century to actually think outside of our own comfort. Every single thing we do, everything in our entire life has been geared to make us more comfortable. And it's just the way we live. I have a sauna in my house. If I want to go, I have a sauna. I get to take a sauna. I don't know why you guys don't. Dave, you grew up with a sauna, right? We took saunas at your house, right? Yeah, I don't know. It's a nice thing to have as a sauna. You guys have cars. You have heat. Everything in the world has been set right. What?
My heat was out today.
Oh, can we gather around Glenn and pray for his oppressed nature? The Satan is really hitting him. He doesn't have the heat today, right? But around the world, they don't have all these things, and so it's very difficult. The technology we have is incredible, the ability to communicate with someone anywhere in the world. I can remember in my lifetime, we've went from, forget even, the first cell phone I had, which we went to G.I. Joe's. Remember G.I. Joe's in Albany? I got a bag phone. Remember the bag phone? It had the best connectivity. And I can remember thinking that was the most amazing thing in the world. And now, on the few times I've flown, I hear people complaining that the technology, it's not hit. They don't have what they in the air, that they can't do something immediately. And I'm thinking it might take a minute to bounce off a satellite and come back. I don't know how it works. Is that how it works? Satellites? I don't know. Brandon? Okay. But we have these expectations about comfort. The information available, the search engines, everything is out there. And it really, for example, for those of us who like to argue, it has ruined the art of arguing. Because 90% of the art, you get it, 90% of the art of arguing is not being correct. It's being persuasive, right? And now that anybody can just stop and check my facts, it has really ruined it. That's all I do now. At my house, somebody will go, what is the name of that? And they start talking. I'm like, I don't know. There it is, right? No passion behind it, but it's there. Everything. The medical advances are unbelievable. One of the reasons I got a heated towel thing is, I don't know, some of you have said this, but since my heart surgery, I've heard, and I actually checked with some physicians and some medical people, that after you do that heart surgery and after they take your heart out, the Lion King it, right? That a lot of your thermostat is messed up. I'm cold Floyd, you've destroyed my life, Floyd. I had to have Floyd come over. I didn't ask Floyd to come over. I just hinted. And so Floyd showed up, my electrician buddy. And apparently, what was it? I'm running, what's the amp for the little, it's a 1,500 watt space heater is not supposed to be plugged into my living room wall. Did any of you know that? You knew that? Right? It's a little too much. I'm cold all the time. And I've stopped thinking about the fact that I'm alive, that they took my heart out of my chest, and they put a cow valve in the aortic, that I had 107.1 fever, and I'm here to just complain about the fact that now I'm too cold. I was way too hot, and now I'm too cold. The medical advances, it's insane, the stuff that we automatically adjust to, that it's just built for us to be comfortable. Even diseases that my mom and her generation had to deal with growing up, they're no longer an issue at all. We never wake up and go, man, I hope we don't get smallpox. We don't sit around and think, I hope I don't get polio, or is it pronounced even rubella? I just looked up there's a bunch of stuff that they believe in America, right? We've pretty much put an end to this thing. And even my parents didn't have to worry about a lot of other stuff. My parents never worried too much about the bubonic plague. Even that. But the bubonic plague wiped out approximately 50%. Think of that. This is in Europe, where most, right? Half the life on the planet in Europe was destroyed in the bubonic plague in the 14th century. When they woke up for years, it's only been a while. We're only 2 or 3 generations away from when every day you woke up thinking, I might die today. Everything about your life was consistent. It's why, honestly, it's one of the reasons that you'd have 11, 13, 15 kids on a farm. By the end of the day, you'd only have 5 or 6 working it. We've talked about this mother of your first your oldest 2 brothers. They both passed away in early childhood, right? Before 3 years old. And that's just 2 generations, or 1 generation removed from me. This stuff, it was living with the idea that you could die with these diseases that we don't even think about. Well, that's not the point of the message today. It's so difficult because my friends, those of us who talk about this stuff, you know that my number one thing that I try to do, obviously being biblically accurate, but to be biblically accurate, you have to be contextually correct. And the context of living in the first century as a Jewish individual, we cannot communicate. I don't even know. As much as I want to, you guys need to, I don't know. I'm having to do the research, but it just hits our American ears. When you read through the Testament, the Bible, which, by the way, is a historical document, it mentions, however, one specific disease that was an absolute terror in the first century Middle East. And what was it? Leprosy. Leprosy, and again, when we hear leprosy in that context, one thing I do know is leprosy consisted of a variety of skin conditions that it would fall under. But leprosy was one of them. Leprosy was a horrific, and it is still around the world. It's still around the world a horrific disease. And I was reading about it. It begins with the loss of sensation in some part of the body, and the muscles waste away, and the tendons begin to contract. And so I wanted to see images of leprosy, and I immediately stopped looking at images of leprosy. It's a horrific, dehumanizing, horrible, horrible thing. The next thing is it opens ulcers on your skin, ulcerous areas where you're just oozing out and your body is wasting and dying. And then the next thing happens is fingers and toes begin to fall off, and then hands and feet begin to fall off. And of course, it'd be good if this thing killed you quickly, but it doesn't. That around the world, they say it's a 30 to 35-year process. The undead, that they should be dead. They're dead in every way, except they're still having to walk around and experience the ramifications of living like that. And that would be something to live even around us today. We would shun them enough. We would keep them at a distance. But man, in first century Israel, the only thing that might be worse than the physical impact was the social isolation that a leper would feel. I mean, what we think, again, we're not first century. We still think in terms of church, and we think of state and separation, and whatever you feel about that. That's not the Jewish way of thinking in first century. Everything was Jewish. Everything was the Mosaic law. Everything came under this idea. And so to be a Jew in the first century, well, the Jewish law demanded that lepers had to stay 6 feet away from anyone at all times. Anyone at all times. Right? And if you actually came across the wind was blowing, you had to go ahead and isolate 150 feet from anybody. You had to move out of the way 150 feet if you just felt like the wind was blowing. But it was even worse than the pain, right? Even worse than the physical pain. Can you imagine then the loneliness these people felt? I was reading a thing, Mother Teresa was writing about her experiences in India, and that's the thing she writes about most. It's not the physical pain of the people she was called, it's the emotional isolation, the relational cutoff, the absolute loneliness that they felt. All the physical contact gone. I want to make sure I didn't miss something because I had something I want to share. It was even worse than the pain. You see, the religious people, they saw leprosy as a spiritual condition. And remember, it wasn't a government and a religious. It was the same thing. So to be in first century Israel, when you saw someone who was a leper, you thought you thought that it was a spiritual condemnation upon them. It was a judgment upon the victim. And I was thinking, man, I don't know if I should say this one, but I thought, well, I've said worse, right? Do you remember the 80s when AIDS first hit? And do you remember the reaction of many of the fundamentalist Christian community to AIDS? And do you remember how it was being said? And again, I'm not here to argue or not. I'm just giving you a fact. You process it however you want to process it. But they were saying about these people that it was a condemnation, a judgment upon God, that anyone who had AIDS, that was God's punishment upon them. Remember that? And so we avoided them. We've never come across them. That's the closest in my lifetime I can remember. And again, for those of you who are saying something different, I'm just saying that was a fact. Was that not how? So those people were isolated and alone, but at least they had other areas that were taking them in. Even that is not even close to the way you would have felt as a first century leper in Jerusalem. Because they were more than scorned, they were hated. They were deserving of no mercy and no pity because guess what? God had condemned them. He had said this to them, is what the Jewish people thought. It was in their law, they thought. So people there's instances recorded of people who were throwing rocks at them. And you know who was the first one picking up the rocks to throw at them? The rabbis. Pharisees would often do that because they were participating in God's condemnation of the evil, right? The minute you start to think that God hates this group of people, it allows you to do what? Hate them actively. It validates your hate for them. So out of spite or to keep them at a distance, people would, out of fear, because to touch them was to be unclean yourself. And again, not just physically. You were spiritually unclean, and until you went through all the cleansing rituals, you, just by being in contact, you couldn't enter into the temple. You couldn't do the sacrificial system. And that was everything to a Jewish individual. It was horrible to be a leper. I don't think that it's possible to understand the pain and the shame and the hopelessness that was felt by a leper. Now, why do I say all that? Because even as much as I try, I can't, and I don't understand the horrific nature that was the backdrop of the next thing we're studying, which is a leper approaching Jesus, this encounter that is in Matthew 8, 1 through 4. So let's go ahead and let's look at this thing. When Jesus came down from the mountain, he just returned from the Sermon on the Mount, right? Large crowds followed him, and a leper came to him. And this is the thing, it doesn't say, and I want you guys, we create narratives that are not in Scripture. And so the one thing I will do is, if it doesn't say it, I'm not going to add it. It doesn't say from the mountain, large crowds followed him, and then they all left, and in a private moment where Jesus was by him. It doesn't say that. It says, in the midst of these large crowds, a leper came to him and bowed down before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see that you tell no one, but go, show yourself to the priest and present the offering that Moses commanded as testimony to them. Is that it, Trent? Is that like it? Okay. All right. So the first thing is, there's so much happening. There's more to this that he says in this encounter. But the first and most obvious question would be, what is this offering that Moses commanded? Well, the entire Jewish system of governing, as we said, was based upon the Mosaic law. That God gave Moses as Israel traveled in their time, following their captivity in Egypt. If you don't know the backdrop, it's very easy. They were enslaved in Egypt. God sends Moses, a man uniquely qualified to deliver them. Through God's intervention and Moses being the mouthpiece of God, they're delivered. But then for 40 years, they spend this time in the desert being cleansed. God speaks through what we call the Ten Commandments. There was a lot more. Right? The law of Moses, he was not just creating a system by which to worship, he was establishing a nation. And the one thing we don't give Moses enough credit for here, but they do in Israel, was his genius as a statesman. He's the patriarch of Israel. He was establishing with God's divine word everything they were going to do, not just to survive in the meantime, but to thrive later when they became Israel. You guys get that? And so the Mosaic law, that's it. And that law, it actually addressed the system by which a leper could return to society if healed. And like I said, even though there's really no healing for leprosy, the title of leprosy included many, many skin diseases. And so here's what Moses set up, and this is what God commanded him to say. And we find this in Leviticus 14:1 through 7, right here. Leviticus, where's my Leviticus? Is it not Spencer? Where's my Leviticus?
Oh, sorry. Trent was distracted.
Yeah, I know. Trent. Have you ever seen that thing? Oh, there it is. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "This shall be the law of the leper in the day of his cleansing. Now he shall be brought to the priest." This is the command, the offering. "He shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out to the outside of the camp. Thus the priest shall look, and if the infection of the leprosy has been healed in the leper, then the priest shall give orders to take 2 live clean birds and cedar wood and a scarlet string and hyssop," I believe it's pronounced, if it's not, don't correct me, "for the one who is to be cleansed. The priest shall also give orders to slay the one bird in an earthenware vessel over running water. As for the live bird, he shall take it together with the cedar wood and the scarlet string and the hyssop. Then he shall dip them and the live bird in the blood of the bird that was slain over the running water. He shall then sprinkle 7 times the one who is to be cleansed from the leprosy, and shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the live bird go free over the open field." Now, this is one of those things in Leviticus that most of us pass by. We get confused, we read it, and we go, "I don't get it," and we miss, I believe, and we talked a lot this week, right, Dave? This may be the most amazing portion of Scripture I've ever read. And maybe some of you picked up on it and didn't even actually go, "I think I'm picking up on something pretty big here." This thing is incredible. There's a bit more, but the offering Moses commanded was this stuff that Jesus was referring to. He healed the leopard, and the leper had to bring these things to the priest. And then the priest would do the things he was supposed to do, and he'd get a certificate of health to re-enter society. So last week I said that everything that Jesus said and did spoke to both his identity and his vocation. That everything spoke to his character and his calling. And this, we just read, in my mind, is the greatest example in the New Testament. This thing is crazy, people. This thing, it blew my mind. See, the word that some translations use, for example, that this isn't the part, but I'm going to lay the groundwork, that some say, when it said he bowed down, I won't say the Greek word, it's prosek, I don't know how to say it, but it actually translates as bow down in worship. So the first thing we have to realize is, anybody who ever tells you that Jesus never claimed to be God is ignorant, right, or malicious. They're one of the two. They're either ignorant or they're an opponent of the faith, because Jesus has said, no one but who is worthy to be worshiped? The Father. No one but God, right? And then this guy comes to him, and the word is he bowed down in worship, and Jesus didn't say, "Get up, stop." He acted as if this was appropriate. And so, this is the first thing I want you guys to remember from last week, but even better than that. Because Jesus actually declares his vocation right now. He declares his vocation in a way that actually slips past all of us. He's about to say, in this act, everything he was called to do, his calling that only Jesus, only the Messiah, only the Christ could pull off, that all of human history, right, had been pointing towards. It is in this command that Moses gave, that Moses, I'm sure, had no idea, but God knew. And it's a way that I know it slips by us because, like I said, we're not Jewish, but surprisingly, it had slipped past the Jews, even though it had been under their nose for 1,000 years, the whole time, the offering of Moses. And if you think I'm exaggerating this, let me just go through the elements. Hyssop. It's a plant that you see quite often throughout Scripture. It's a pretty main character, actually. Hyssop throughout the Old Testament, and we see it in the New. Hyssop, the original Passover, do you remember? At the original Passover, when they were to put the blood of the lamb over their doorposts, they got this plant, they put it on the end of the sticks, they soaked it in the blood of the lamb, and they put it on the doorpost. Hyssop, at the final Passover, at the original Passover, at the final Passover week, at the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Do you remember what the guy soaked the vinegar in to give to Jesus? Hyssop. Hyssop is played throughout. It's at the original Passover, and it's at the final Passover. Hyssop had cleansing properties. It had medicinal properties. That's the first one. Hyssop. Hyssop, an element of cleansing. Cedarwood. Cedarwood, you were told to take cedarwood, this thing that Moses said, that Jesus said to the leper to take the priest. Cedarwood was used in their religious ceremonies because it was resistant to decay. They thought it was almost impervious to impurities. Cedarwood, pretty cool. And here's the one you can't miss. 2 live birds. One of the birds was slain, an innocent bird. The other one then was covered in its blood and then cleansed and set free. How can you miss it? It's crazy. Let me just say what we just said. Not a church, not a Jesus thing. Let me just tell you what I just said. That the law of Moses commanded, that Jesus said, now go make sure the priests get this, because this is happening. A cleansing which would never decay, which provided deliverance through the slaying of an innocent and the free covered by blood. Maybe you get it. Is this insane? And we look at the Levitical thing and we pass by it. We think it's just a statute of laws. Everything, and I'm going to say this not having read everything, but here's my statement of faith on the Old Testament. Everything in the Old Testament points to Jesus Christ. Amen. That's my belief. I just think anything I don't know, I just don't know yet. I learned this week. Right there in the Mosaic Law, all along pointing to the Messiah's calling, his vocation, what he had come to do, to offer an eternal cleansing made pure through his blood shed upon the cross. But there's also this thing that I was always taught, I didn't know what it meant, but the Baptists would always go, in the Bible, there's this scarlet thread of redemption, right? Remember hearing that? That it means that Jesus is all throughout it. And I thought we came up with that. That's in the law of Moses. There's a scarlet thread of redemption that begins, and that's part of this law. All of their laws, their sacrificial temple system, this is one of the sacrifices they would take, is a scarlet thread along with the live bird. So everything, all of Israel's history, all of their laws, their sacrificial temple system, well, it moves straight to Jesus Christ, who's the absolute fulfillment of this all. So I would say to you, I just made a case that the law of Moses and then the thing that Jesus said, this act that Jesus said, this encounter with a leper and him saying what was set up 1,000 years ago is now being fulfilled in your midst. Now go to the temple. I would say this reveals Jesus' calling. Everything that only he could do as the Messiah, as someone both in a father-son relationship with God and, as we know, God himself. And we might stop there and go, that's amazing enough, but then it also reveals Christ's character. This encounter does not just reveal the content of what he's supposed to come to do, his calling, his vocation, the thing only he could do. This is so accurate in telling you exactly for 1,000 years. I don't know, are you guys freaked out enough about this as I was when I realized this? That for 1,000 years is written right there in the law of Moses how Jesus was going to do it? That's insane. But it goes even deeper than that, because in this moment he reveals his character. You see, as you read through Christ's earthly ministry, you see these healings, and you see them happen in a variety of fashion. One guy, he spits in the mud. Sounded just like that. That was biblically accurate. And he puts it in the guy's eyes, and he's healed of blindness. Somebody else, he just says what? Stand up. Somebody else, he goes, who touched me? Right? He healed people in a variety of ways, but this time, what does he do? What did Jesus do? He touched, it says, the leper. He touched the leper. Now, I want you to think before we move further. You've heard this all the time. This is not something new. This is something but we say this sometimes what I've heard, it becomes almost a cliche. So let me bring it close to home. Was it in the 80s when the Iron Curtain fell? Who was the dictator of, it was Ceausescu, was it? No, stop it. Ceausescu was, of what nation, Joey? Romania, thank you. I'm not going to do Romania. But what Ceausescu had done was, he had a birthing program. Remember this? He had this birthing program where he would force women to be inseminated, and they would give all these births because he was creating this army of stuff, the socialistic program. And when the Iron Curtain fell, well, so did eventually all of its little puppet kingdoms. And so what happened was, do you remember when all the church communities were rushing to Romania to adopt the babies? Don't you remember that? Well, what happened was this: it fell, and videos came from behind the Iron Curtain in Romania, and there was thousands upon thousands upon thousands of babies in these little steel cages and cribs. And I studied this in psychology in the late 80s, because every one of them were doing this. Every one of them, thousands of kids, and it was silent. And they're all rocking themselves. And each one of them are self-soothing. We need contact. I don't think Joe and I and stuff, we joke about hugs and all this stuff. We need hugs. We need people to touch us. They've done studies that show, and they have people's minds hooked up. And what occurs when this just happens, this thing, the properties of human contact, we are not meant. From day one, what has man decided, and they continue to today, within our penal system, within our prisons, from day one, what is the worst possible punishment you can give to someone? Solitary confinement. It's the worst thing. We just intuitively know the worst thing you can do is cut somebody off. And so the fact that Jesus, in this system, that Jesus touched him, that should be enough. I should be able to stop there. I should just go, this thing is crazy. But Mark's account of this, probably Peter recounting it to Mark, he says it differently. He actually says that Jesus reached out. And it says here, if you look at it, Jesus reached out to touch him. That implies that what was there between them still? There was still distance between them. That this leper came up. And this is amazing because it says, why did Jesus do this? This is what Mark says. The book of Mark says it was because he was moved with compassion. And this idea about moved with compassion, it means moved to our bowels, right? But what that means is from the very core of your being, this springs forth. And all the time in Scripture, more than any time else, this is when it talks about a mother. A mother reaching out to their child, their baby. A mother is moved with compassion. It comes from, the maternal instinct, moms will die before they let something happen. Is that it's physical, it's chemical. You can't help it. Jesus was moved the way a mother is moved for their child when he saw this leper, and he says, I have to close the distance to give you exactly what you need. I could say, here's some mud, slap some mud on it. I could say, be healed. But he was moved like a mother to a child to go, I got to get there. It's crazy. This is how he was moved. He has to. It's an emotional response. And you see it play out here. Because what does a mother do when her child needs her and there's distance between them? She closes the distance. Jesus closed the distance, moved by compassion. But maybe you also missed this. Why was there distance? You see, the other thing is, I know as a child, when I was a child, that when I was, in fact, my brothers used to mock me for this. But when I was a child and I had something injurious, whether it was emotionally, psychologically, or painfully, who would I run to? Don't say it, Joe. I had a speech impediment and you're mocking it. They literally would. They knew that the person, if I was hurting, I wanted to be next to my mom, and I would go there. And so they would, as soon as my brother would release his knees off of my body, and I could swallow the grass he had just inserted, he would then say, it's a true story. He would then say, oh, what are you going to do? Go tell mother? You don't come out looking good in this story, Joe. Sometimes I was only happy the grass was clean. So think about this, though. Hey, the leper stopped short. The leper stopped short. He didn't close all the distance. Think how amazing this is. People run to their mother. People run to the source of where they know the healing is going to come from. But the leper stopped short. I want you guys to think about this. Think about what the leper ran to him because he knew Jesus could heal him, right? But he stopped short. The leper knew Jesus was worthy of worship. But the leper did what? He stopped with distance still between them. He stopped short. And I began to think, and this is where there's nothing except one thing left on my notes. I began to think about all of us. I want to think about us. Every one of us in here who have crossed the line of faith, so I'm talking to believers, every one of us did so because we looked at our condition, didn't we? And we knew that we desperately need Jesus. Am I overstating that? I can't do this. Life is hard enough on its own. Then with what I bring to the table, there's no way for happiness and hope and joy to end out of this thing. So every one of us are like the leper who look at our condition, right? Every one of us in here, let me talk about the leper. Every one of us know that Jesus can heal us, right? Every one of us know that whatever it is, whatever we got, that He's the source of it. And so we move towards Him. Every one of us, we sang worship today, and I love how Spencer said it. He said, don't let this be something that warms you up to worship. This is worship. Everything we do, we worship God, we worship Christ because we know He's worthy of worship. So here's what I'm asking us. Why do we stop short? Why? Why do we not close the distance? Why do we hold back? Why do we not buy in? Why are we not radically changed? Why are we not immediately transformed? Why do we still seek our comfort? Why do we still think my preference is king? Why don't we just give it all to God wrapped in the embrace of Jesus? We stop short, don't we? I mean, let's just be honest, if nothing else. Don't we stop short? Right? He's always having to reach out. He's having to pull us in. And I'm telling you this, I love the fact that He reaches out, that I feel His touch. But I also hate the fact that I don't go all the way. I hate that about me, and I hate that about you guys. I hate that about the church, that we stay at a distance. Why is that? And here's what I said, and it's on your little card. Because even though the leper knew all these things, he was focused upon his condition rather than Christ's character. Even though the leper knew all these things, he was focused upon his condition rather than Christ's character. And I can tell every one of us in here, if you still think about you and your problems and your issues and your stuff all the time, if you're still focused, I even mean with loathing. I mean with loathing, with me going, I hate myself. I wish I wasn't this way. I wish I wasn't this way. If your focus is on all of this, you will never close the distance yourself. You will never, because when you were, what did I say on the card? I wrote something really cool in the card. Glenn left. Here we go. Because focusing on our condition and not Christ's character will always keep us at a distance from God. Is that not true? Everyone in here has something you're going through, myself included. And every one of us want to get there today. We all want this thing to happen right now. And we start thinking about what we want, and eventually who are we thinking about? And then I always end up, why won't it happen? Because I'm a jerk. I still have the same stuff I struggled with years ago. And now I'm thinking about what? Who am I thinking about again? Me. Even if I'm hating me, even if I'm condemning me, we get together and we talk about you, me, us. We need to celebrate Christ. We need to talk about Jesus. We need to celebrate the Lord of all creation who has had His bowels moved for us. And He's reaching out to us. And I would simply ask you guys as we leave, and as Spencer said, go the next leg of our journey. Wherever it leads, trust us. We're trying to be us. Trust that we're trying to follow God in whatever He's calling us to do. We invite you to be a part of that. But I would say to that, nothing we will ever give you, nothing we will ever provide you will be a substitute for you running all the way to Jesus. You're not going to hear a message that's going to change your life in that fashion. You're not going to hear some worship that's going to change. You can leave here and find another church. If you don't run all the way to Jesus and embrace Jesus with everything you have, you are still focused on who? Me. He longs to reach out and touch us, and thank God that He does. Can you imagine if we released what we're holding on to and focused on doing it ourselves? Running towards him, his arms are here. Every story about the Father that Jesus ever told is God pursuing us, reaching out, closing the distance. And every story he ever tells, think about the prodigal son. It's always the guy is focused on who? Himself. The son thinks about me. I can't go home. And every day, what's the Father doing? Running to the gate, running, lifting up shamefully, saying, please come home. Everything in the nature of God is to pursue us at great, great cost. It was said 1,000 years before Jesus. It was right under their nose. And then Jesus has this encounter with the leper, and he says, look, it's all here. And I love the fact that he goes, don't tell anyone, but go to the temple with it, because I'm coming. I don't have a good end on this, but like I said last week, I don't think I'm supposed to. The narrative we start here shouldn't be the end of your conversation with Christ. I believe Sunday should be the beginning of a new thought, of something new he's revealing. So go home with it today and think about it.